read Psalm number 62 responsively. Psalm number 62, page number 180. We will read the last verse together. Shall we read responsively? My soul waited in silence for God only. From Him cometh my salvation.
He only is my God and my salvation. He is my God, I shall not be greatly.
My soul cried in silence for God only, for my expectation is from Him.
He only is my God and my salvation. He is my God, I shall not be moved.
With God is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength and my refuge is in God.
Trust in Him in all times. Give people for all your power and glory. God is the refuge for us.
Trust not in oppression and declare not vain in robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart thereon.
God has spoken once, Christ has spoken that the Lord will not endure.
Also unto thee, O Lord, love with loving kindness, for thou renderest to every man according to his soul. This you are very seated.
In every corner of the world, people are in need of our prayer, and they are seeking out prayer every time. So it is our responsibility and it is our duty to pray for them. Therefore, let us take this time to pray for three various prayers answered. The first one is let us take time to pray for this flood crisis that occurred in Kerala. They are in need of our relief and rehabilitation. And also, secondly, we will pray for those people who are in poverty, and also let us take this time to pray for our community. Shall we all come together and pray? Lord, we take this time remembering the victims of the disaster that happened in Kerala. Lord, we know it is hard to be comforted when we lose our family, our near and dear ones, and the properties that have been lost. Therefore, Lord, console and comfort them. Bless those who have survived, and also, Lord, strengthen them in everything that they do. Lord, we also take this time to thank you for everything that we have. You have blessed us amazingly, but too often we take what we have for granted while others suffer. Lord, we thank you for those who work among the poor. We praise for the effort of people who work with the poor every day. Bless them with wisdom, energy, and material things so that they can continue the work that they do. Lord, we also ask you to help us to recognize that poverty not only affects them, the faceless people, but other human beings, people with families, hope, and dreams for a better future. Lord, give us strength to work more faithfully and bring changes in the life of these people. Lord, we are so grateful for the community that you have given us. Thank you that you gave us the privilege to learn from one another, correcting our mistakes, our life, and preparing ourselves to be a better person. Thank you, Lord, that you mold and shape us in different ways so that we could able to fulfill the goal that you have called us. Lord, give us the strength that we may love one another, correct one another, teach one another in a way that you want us to do. Lord, once again, we pray for the teachers here who have dedicated themselves to serve us. Lord, we know many problems, difficulties may come in their life. But Lord, let not this hindrance their way, but let them look upon you, have faith in you, and serve you in all that they can, remembering that your love and kindness, protection always go with them. And never forget that the struggle that they have encountered would never go in vain, but the blessing and reward is always with them. Submitting all the prayer points unto your mighty care for us in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
For this reading, the scripture has been taken from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 13. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 13. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went out, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the word of God.
Matthew chapter 25, verses 24b reads, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seeds. Let us pray. Dear God, even as we spend some time reflecting upon your holy word, we pray that, Lord, you will take control of all our hearts, mind, and our very being. Enable us to discern and understand the lessons that you have for us, so that together we may be blessed. In Jesus' name. Amen. At the outset, I greet you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and also would like to take this time to acknowledge the contribution of the tutorial group for meaningfully leading the service, along with other friends who has helped us in the music. May God continue to bless all of you mightily, even in the days to come. The parable of the talents, that is the subtitle given to the chosen text, that is Matthew chapter 25, verses 15 to 30. As an introduction, I'll say why I chose this particular text. First thing, I have a kind of an emotional attachment to this text. Why? It goes back to my BD days. This very passage was the passage upon which I built my first sermon. Just like you, when I got the opportunity, this was the passage. And I remember very clearly taking the help of this William Barclay Bible commentary to prepare a sermon. All those things. That is why I feel that I have this emotional attachment to this particular text. And the other reason why I chose this text is our class interaction with our BD1 friends. We have a course called Discerning the Signs of Times. Under that, we have this subtopic, Reimagining the Sources of Theology, Scripture and Hermeneutics. And another subtopic called Enabling Subaltern Perspective. I guess that will give us a hint as to where we will be going. That inspired or challenged us. We have reflected upon many passages from the Bible, especially the New Testament, in our class. And this evening, I have chosen this text to reflect upon from a different perspective. When we look into the parable of the talents, a brief explanation of the parable of the talents. It is about a man going on a journey who summons his slaves, or in some translation it is servants, but I will be using the term slaves, who summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To the first he gave 5 talents, to the second he gave 2, and to the third he gave 1. Immediately after the master departed, the first 2 servants involved or engaged themselves in order to make profit, and the parable records that they made a double of what they received. Both of them made a double profit of what was entrusted to them. Then we have this third character, that is the third one, who instead of doing business or making a profit, went dug a hole in the ground and what we call kept that in it. When the master returns, there is this time of accounting, giving accounts, and we find that those first 2 slaves who made profit were acknowledged as by the master. Well done, good and trustworthy servant, and they were made in charge of many more things. But to the third slave, who did not make any profit or who did not do any business, was banished from the world, master's world, into the world of darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. That is a brief summary of the parable as we find in the text. Generally speaking, based on this, I think many moral lessons are drawn out, and I remember I also did likewise, right? Most interpreters would say that it has to do with the eschatological coming and this future, this thing, basically based on verse 19, which says after a long time, and it is normally connected or referred to the coming of Parosha or Endes. And again in verses 21 and verses 23 of the parable, right? Verses 21 and 23, we find the master's blessings. Enter into the joy of the master. And again in verse 30, we find the master saying, as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is interpreted by many as an allegorical representation of the Endes. And also, when we look into the what we call placing of this parable, it comes in between chapter 24 and 25, where we find Matthew in detail elaborating the judgment or the end days. And that is why many eschatological end days related moral lessons are actually reflected upon from this particular text. We can say, in short, we can say that the 3 slaves becomes a kind of a moral character for us, right? Normally speaking. First, the first two slaves were faithful in what they were entrusted, and therefore were blessed by the master, right? A simple reading. And in that sense, I remember interpreting this text as being given different abilities or talents, and it is our responsibility to use it so that we will be blessed when Christ comes back again. And likewise, we will also find many moral interpretation which is pointed towards the third slave. Like, he was so, in that sense, cautious that he did not attempt to make any profit. Rather, out of failure, what he did, he refused to even try to succeed. And likewise, we will find many interpretation which normally would attach a kind of a negative connotation towards this third slave, the slave who dug a hole in the ground and buried the talents. And that is where many of the interpretations go, right? This evening, I would like to point out a verse from the passage that we have shown, that we have read, that is Matthew chapter 25, verse 24. Okay, please, and I read, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seeds. Normally, this master is referred to our Lord. Why? Because in chapter 25 verse 14, a man going on a journey is normally interpreted as or assumed to be God. So when he returns back, he settles account. But the way it represents, the way the third slave representation of the master represents our God as someone who is, let me say, as someone who is very harsh, someone who is very, in that sense, exploitative in nature, who is manipulative, and who is very stern, who is very cruel. These are some of the characteristics that is portrayed by the third slave's characterization of the master. And if we reflect and ask this question, is our God the God whom we worship, or the God who, in that sense, whom we have our faith? If we ask ourselves, is our God really a harsh God? Is our God really a very stern God? Is our God really a very exploitative or a manipulative God? I think the answer will be not so much affirmative, and that is the reason why I have chosen to reread the Bible, reread this particular parable from the perspective of the third man slave's portrayal of the master, and in that sense, it can be called as a subversive reading of the text. Subversive, in simple terms, will mean rebellious or revolutionary reading of the text. Why? Okay? It is, in that sense, this subversive reading is not based on assumptions or presuppositions, or it's not based on speculations, but rather I would like to read this text from a subversive point of view by taking into consideration Jesus' original settings. That means, placing this character, the third slave, the master, and all these characters that we find in Jesus' original settings. That means Jesus' time, and try to reflect some lessons for us. If we look into Jesus' time, the time when Jesus, in that sense, narrated this parable, we will find that Jesus' time was a time when the social settings was divided into three important units. Jesus' social settings was divided into three units. The first one is household. The second one is cities, right? And the third one is kingdom. Okay? And out of these three units, it is said that the household occupied or played a very significant role in terms of social, political, economic, and even cultural significance. It was very important. And when we say household during Jesus' time, it refers not to the household of the poor or the farmer class, the peasants class, but it refers to the elite, high, rich, what we call masters, their household. And it is said that economically, politically, socially, and even culturally, this household unit, played significant role. It is here in this household, the elite household, not the poor farmers or peasants household, the rich elite household. It is here where wealth was concentrated. It is here where wealth was transacted from one household to other. It is here in this household, elite household, where wealth were redistributed, where wealth were gathered together. It is here where trading took place, import, export, all those things, and therefore it played a very significant economic role. Right? And just like that, out of many households, the next level was the cities. A city would consist of many allied households. There were other insignificant households, but those were not taken into consideration. Many allied, powerful in that sense, right? Household together formed a city, and the city was also a hub of extensive economic and political networking or activities. And the next level was this kingdom. Just as a city was a group of household, a kingdom was formed by a group of cities. Okay, that is how the society was structured during Jesus' time. And that is where Jesus actually brings us this parable, or this parable of the talents. I think that that structure, social structure, is important for us to keep in mind in order to understand what actually Jesus meant by this parable. Okay, keeping that in mind, I would like to now look into a little bit of detail now into the structure of the household where this parable took place. Okay, where this parable is narrated, the structure of the household. That is the first unit. Okay. Now it is said that the household during Jesus' time, right, was based on hierarchical model. From the top it comes down. If you are at the top, you are powerful. If you are at the bottom, you are least powerful. Okay, even within the household there was this categorization of power. Okay, and it is said that it is, as pointed out, it is the most important unit of the ancient world during Jesus' time. And each household at the top of the hierarchy will be a master, the master in the parable. Okay, under the master will be slaves. Under the slaves will be stewards. Under the stewards, and then next will be accountant, and so on. It was a structured hierarchy. From the top, master is the owner who controls everything, whose property it will be, and the rest, including the slaves, stewards, and the accountant, work under him. Okay, that is how the household was structured. Okay, that is how the household was structured. The master, okay, often would go or undertake long journey. Why? In order to do business or in order to enhance his business. Okay, and often stayed away from the household. He was the owner, but on account of business ventures, in order to enhance business, in order to protect his business. And it is also said that in order to gain royal patronage, that means favor from the king, he would often undertake long journeys and often be away from home, his household, for many days. It was during such ventures that he would often call his slaves, okay, to take care of his business, and that is where the parable comes. Okay, that is where we find in the beginning of this parable. A man undergoing for journeys, summoned his slave. That means in order to protect, enhance, and also to gain royal patronage, he was about to go on a journey, and therefore now he calls his slave to take care of his business, okay, to ensure that the business runs without any interruption. And that is the setting of our parable. Okay, that is the setting of our parable. Since the master traveled extensively, right, slaves in the hierarchical model, the slaves were entrusted to continue with the business. Often, okay, slaves were very powerful. Why? Because they were next to the master and they had control. Okay, unlike the normal connotation that we will conclude today. When we say slave, we would now, right, or servant, we would consider them as below or in the lower rung of the hierarchy. But here, the slaves were often very powerful. Okay, because in the absence of the owner or the master, it was them who ensured that the business of the master continued without any interruption. And therefore, they were very powerful, and at the same time, they were the ones who misused that authority. Okay? They were the ones who misused the authority by indulging in exploitative and manipulative ways of enhancing the wealth of the master, right? To enhance. That is why one was given 5 talents. He ensured that it was double. Okay, to ensure or enhance the wealth of the master in the absence of the master. Okay, that is where this picture comes. And also, not only to enhance the master's business, but they also ensure that they also gain something from the business, okay, to ensure their what we call future. And that is why they were the most manipulative and exploitative figure. Okay? And it is also said that sometimes the masters, those owners, were also aware of the fact that the slaves were engaged in such exploitative ways. But he did not, in that sense, object to that. Why? For the simple reason, all the dirty work to enhance his wealth was done by the slaves, right? And thereby the wrath of anger, or the anger that would have been directed towards the master, was directed to them. Therefore, the slaves were hated by the people. Anyone who exploits us, we will not have a, in that sense, good opinion about them. And that is the case of the slaves here. Okay, and therefore it is said that these slaves would indulge or involve themselves in exploitative and or manipulative ways. Number one, to enhance the business of the master, right, of the household, and also at the same time to make some profit for themselves. How? To indulge in some exploitative manner, right, or means. And therefore, right, keeping this brief background again, which serves as our background, okay, to interpret the parable that we have read, I would like to reinterpret the the parable from the perspective of subversive reading, rebellious or revolutionary reading. And in order to do that one, I would like to divide the parable that we have read into three sections. Okay, three sections, which first one, right? First one, distribution of wealth, verses 14 and 15. Distribution of wealth. The second one, business ventures, verses 16 to 18. And the third one, settling of accounts and the judgment, that is verses 19 to 30. I would like to divide the parable into these three sections and examine one by one and bring out the kind of a subversive reading. Okay. First one, the distribution of the wealth, that is verses 14 and 15. The fact that the man is traveling, okay, and the fact that they were slaves under him denotes or points to the fact that the master was a rich man. Okay? And the opening scene also depicts that he assigns his wealth, right, entrusted his wealth to three slaves. That shows that he was a rich man. And the assigning of the wealth also is hierarchy based. That is why one got 5, the other one got 3, the other one got 1. It is based on the hierarchy. Okay? And that is why the man distributed his wealth to his slaves according to the hierarchical order. And why the distribution of wealth? Okay? Unlike the moral reading, the distribution of the wealth was not for the sake of examining or testing the capability or the honesty or loyalty of the slaves, which we normally interpret. Okay, but why the distribution of the wealth? Okay, the distribution of the wealth or talent, right, was an opportunity to make or to amass more wealth. Okay, to gather more wealth, and that is why 5 was converted to 10, 2 to 4, and so on. Okay, so distribution of the wealth by the master means entrusting the slaves to make more wealth, more profit, in short. Okay, that is why this, what we call the distribution of the wealth. It therefore, right, it therefore leads to this kind of conclusion that the slaves were the ones who were actively involved in enhancing the wealth of the master. Okay, they played all this dirty role and so on, right? But how did they do that? No, how did they do that? We move to the second section, that is the business venture. Okay, that is as pointed out, verses 16 and 18. The first, as we read the parable, we find that the first and the second slave immediately started their business, and we also find them doubling, making a double profit of what they had actually received, and thereby it reflects their diligence, it reflects their zeal to make a handsome profit for their master. At the same time, if we look into the background of what we have already reflected, it reflects to their desire to make profit for themselves also. It was not only about the master, but a profit for themselves also. Right? And a look at the background reflects that. Their aim, the aim of the slaves, who were powerful and corrupt, was to first secure the wealth that they were entrusted to them, then to try to double the wealth that was entrusted to them, and also seek some personal profit. Okay, that was the main purpose. And therefore, right, in all these things, it was ultimately the peasants, the what you call farmers class, no, who were exploited. Okay, it is in such a context that I would like to draw our attention to the third slave's remarks. Okay, the elites or the rich family, rich farmers they control the land and everything that the land possesses, right? And also the produce of the land. And the motto was, right, maximum profit, just as globalization would do today, right? Maximum profit at the cost of the poor. Okay, that was the ideology that worked within this household, the slave and the masters, right? Now, when Jesus, we come to Jesus, right? When Jesus narrated this parable of the talents, it is said that the hearers, those who listened to them, they did not have any difficulty in understanding that one. Why? Because the listeners, no, the hearers, were the people who were exploited by these slaves, right? And therefore, they did not have any difficulty in comprehending, in understanding why Jesus was using this particular parable. Okay, because the slaves were representative of the exploitation that they were undergoing. They had to confront and they had to be contended with such slaves all the time. And therefore, the listeners, no, the hearers, when Jesus narrated this parable, had no problem connecting to the parable. I hope you are getting the point, no? They had no problem. And it is important also to note that during Jesus' public ministry here on this earth, we will see that Galilee and Judah was under severe economic crisis, stress. Why? Because of double taxation. Roman taxation, they had to pay tax to the empire, and also the temple tax. And after paying those two tax, double taxation, whatever little extra was left was again exploited by these slaves. Okay, and therefore, right, in that sense, okay, these hearers, those who were listening to Jesus' parable, they could easily identify with what Jesus was saying. Okay, but one thing that shocked them was that they could not comprehend what the third slave did, because it was not the usually accepted norm. Instead of doing business by exploiting the people, what he did, he dug a hole, buried it and all. It was quite unlike the usually accepted norm. And therefore the hearers of this parable could not identify to that. Okay? They could easily identify with the first two slaves, but they could not identify or understand or comprehend the action of the third slave. Okay? And thus it leads to the third point, okay, that is the settling of accounts and the judgment, verses 19 to 30. We can again divide this settling of the accounts for the sake of clarity into two parts. First with the two slaves, and the second one with the third slave. Right? It is said that as we read the parable, a simple reading, right? Upon returning from the journey, that is the master after returning from his business trip, right? He settled the account. The first two were rewarded as they were expected, okay, and were given more and bigger responsibility. It means, right? It means they were called as well done, good and trustworthy slave. Okay, and it reflects that the master also approves and appreciates the fact that these slaves have proven to be effective exploiters. Master knew that they were exploiting, and when he said, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave," it indicates that he was, in that sense, appreciating and endorsing the fact that they were exploiting the people to enhance his wealth. Okay? If we go by the moral reading, then that is the portrayal of our God. I believe none of us would like to comprehend or visualize our God as an exploitative God who would appreciate us for exploiting someone. Right? But this is the original settings in which this parable was said. And therefore, right? And therefore, in order to be labeled as well done, good and trustworthy slave, one has to be very effective in exploiting the others, according to the master here. Okay, that is why he said these words to the two slaves. Okay, and he goes on to say, "I will put you in charge of many more things." Verses 21 indicates that the two slaves were given more responsibility. At the same time, it indicates, right, they were entrusted to be more exploitative, to exploit more, so that the master's wealth will be enhanced. Then we come to this what we call settling of accounts with the slave, the third slave. In fact, the hero of the parable, if we read from a subversive point of view, and the slave, that third slave, we will find that is the focus of this parable, a mysterious figure in that sense. Okay, both for the hearers of Jesus' parable as well as for the master himself. Okay, why? Because he received much attention than the two slaves together, and at the same time, when he was called upon to settle the accounts, quite unlike the contemporary way of doing, right? We find him making an accusation, accusing the master. Okay, he accuses the master to be very strict, cruel, harsh, and merciless, and therefore it was quite unlike the normally accepted trend, and therefore the mysterious figure in that sense. But the hero, right? In fact, we will find that this third slave belonged to the inner circle, okay, of the household, those who were in that sense, okay, powerful, as pointed out earlier. Okay, but once he raised his voice against his master by calling him as strict, cruel, harsh, and exploitative or merciless, he shames the master. That means his master is also shocked in that sense. Okay? He never expected that from his own people. Okay, but he describes the masters as someone who lived by exploiting the others. Verse 24b, right? By returning the money or the talent that he has received to the master, it shows that he was an honorable man. That means he did not exploit anyone in order to make profit for the master, but rather return to the master what was his. Okay, and that implies that he was an honorable man. Why he chose to return it back, we don't know. Must have had gone a change of heart or something, but parable says that he returned it back. Okay, and that is what is important. Okay, and that points that he was an honorable man. Then comes the judgment. The master never denies the truth that the third slave characterizes about him, right? And the judgment is immediate. We find him, right? We find the master telling to him, "You wicked and lazy slave." Just because he did not exploit anyone in order to enhance the wealth of the master, he is now called as wicked and lazy slave, right? And in that sense, this reflects or this points to the elite, powerful, what we call labeling of an honest person who returned back to the master what was his. Okay? keeping this reading in mind, again as a kind of implication, to show some simple implications. These are very raw implications, but I hope will bring some lessons for us. I would like to especially bring some implications, especially taking into consideration the consequences of the judgment. Okay, let us try to concentrate on the consequences of the judgment. And I would like to first start with a story, a true story, and I would also like to put for our information that I have taken the permission from my friend. Okay, this is about a friend of mine. I have taken the permission from him, so no any this thing. It is about a friend of mine who during our MTH time, when we did our MTH time, he was from the Department of Ethics, okay? and therefore for our thesis proposal we used to come together. Okay, and his thesis, he wanted to write a thesis on the ethical implication of the wealth of the CSI Church in Madhya Kerala Diocese. Okay, and according to his argument, the church possesses immense what we call wealth in terms of land and cash and so on, and therefore he wanted to write a ethical implication of if that is used, how in that sense, ethical implication. Then I remember very clearly Dr. Godwin Shiri, a renowned ethicist, making this remark. First he made this: will you be able to have access to the reports? He said yes, because he was an influential pastor himself. Then the second response was given by Reverend Dr. K.C. Abraham. He said, if you write on this, you will be thrown out of the church. So change your topic. He was asked to change the topic. He could not proceed with that. Sometimes characteristics of what happens inside the church, when some kind of a whistleblower or someone who wants to reveal or wants to write something constructive, often this thing. If I were in the place of K.C. Abraham, I would also have done the same for the benefit or welfare of the student. Okay, I would also have advised the same. I don't want any one of you to be chased out of the church, So I would also have given the same advice. But sometimes, our churches, on account of, let me even use the word spiritual blackmailing. Spiritual blackmailing. Give more, you will be blessed more, or this and that. Sometimes we will find that our churches have amassed huge wealth, in terms of property, land, or even bank balances and all. But sometimes we need to ask ourselves, should those resources, or sometimes the way it is gathered also, through different means. Let us use the word spiritual blackmailing. It gathers immense wealth, and they are not used for, let us say, the poor, the needy, and so on, but rather to enhance the bank balances of the churches. And that is where sometimes these third slaves sometimes can be a challenge for us, can speak to us. Again, the consequences of the judgment is the master deprives the third slave of all that he had, and now the third slave is reduced to that of a peasant or a farmer or what we call jobless labor. He had to now depend on, or he had to be contented and confront his former co-slaves, because now these former co-slaves will, in that sense, discriminate or exploit him now. Okay, and therefore, right, if we read verse 30, because that verse 30, which reads like this, verse 30, as for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. From a moral perspective, normally we judge this as the last judgment, when God comes back these things. Okay, that those who were not faithful with the talents and all, yes, that is one way of interpretation. But placing the parable in its original settings, we will find very interestingly, right, it was the third slave's perspective or description of his life, of the poor people, and the fate that awaited him. Okay, that awaited him. The gnashing of the teeth would also mean, when the peasants or the farmers had lost their land, or when they saw that their agricultural produce, everything was exploited, and therefore out of poverty, left with nothing but to gnashing of teeth, right? And also sometimes it can also refer to chattering of the teeth when you are feeling so cold and where you don't have enough clothing, right? Sometimes our teeth chatters, no? It can also mean this. In that sense, verse 30 is characteristics of the life of the poor people, okay, during Jesus' time, and thus, right, over against moral interpretation of this text, it is quite contrary, and we can safely say that it reflects the life situation of the poor people during Jesus' time. And therefore, right, when these things were said, the hearers, those who heard Jesus saying this, they could easily identify to this kind of situation. Okay? In fact, right, in a very broad sense, to bring some implication, in a very broad sense, we can also say like this, okay, that the third slave is reflective of the third slave's actions and words, okay, is reflective of Jesus' mission itself. Why? Jesus' teachings, Jesus' preaching was directed against the very narrow ritualistic and legalistic norms of the Jewish people, which were very oppressive. For example, the Sabbath law, it was very exploitative, right? And therefore Jesus stood against those things, and we can safely say that that led him to the cross. Okay? And therefore, right, in a very broad sense, we can say that it is representative of Jesus' mission. Okay? Thus, in that sense, okay, we can take some time and maybe perhaps pause for some time and ask ourselves, that whether what would happen if the slaves identified with the farmers rather than with the master. As pastors, what would happen if we try to identify with the so-called the poor people, the exploited, rather than with the church hierarchy sometimes? I think those questions, I'm not in a position to give answers or solutions to that, but simply in form of question, what would happen if we as church, future pastors, try to identify with the poor rather than with the so-called hierarchical order of our sometimes church, sometimes society, sometimes our institution, and so on, okay, where exploitative means are used to enhance the wealth or the bank balances of our church, right? It also raises this simple question: how do we react to a person who tries to reveal the truth, and how far can we go to challenge these oppressive structures as future ministers in our church, institution, and society? May the good Lord grant us the courage to stand against any kind of injustice, and at the same time may He strengthen us to hold on to what is the truth. God bless us all.
Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for being with us throughout our worship service. We thank you for the message that has come to us, enable us not only to listen but even listen of your holy words. We pray that those who seek an answer receive it, and that those who needed a present touch be granted that touch. Bless each of us and keep us safe until you are able to gather again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let us say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever. Let us receive the benediction. In the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God,